All right. Today I want to speak about internal versus external locus of control. How many people have heard of that before? All right. A few of you take responsibility for that. Great. So it's all about internal and external locus of controls. Where do I place the onus of the decisions I make in my life? Am I governed by the decisions and the things outside of me, society, or who I am, what I choose to do, does it flow from within? So something as simple as, I showed up late to a meeting. Do I immediately say, well, it's because the traffic was bad, right? Or do I say it's because I didn't plan well enough to get there? Do I put the circumstances of my decisions, good or bad, outside, or do I take responsibility for it? Same thing can go, though, on a much deeper level with the faith. Do I believe in Jesus Christ? Do I believe all the teachings of the Catholic Church and come to Mass and live this life because of my parents? Because that's what my family does, right? Or because that's what's expected of me? Or is this something that I believe? Something that comes from within me, that no matter who's looking at me and who's not, this is who I am. Thing is, we all begin on external locus of control. We're always taught this is what you do, and because if you don't, I'm going to spank your butt, right? Or you're going to get a speeding ticket for speeding, whatever it might be. When we're taught the faith, it's the do's and the don'ts. That's what the Old Testament was too. We're first all living out of an external locus of control. I do these things because this is what is told of me. But the goal of our life is that as we grow, to become an individual means that we all gain an internal locus of control. That the decisions I make and who I become is not a product of other people, but my own internal convictions. Because the question really is when the externals break down, which is exactly what the readings are talking about, when you no longer have the external structures to protect you and guide you, well, who do you become? Every college student knows this very well. We can be raised in a very strong, faith-filled family, but once I go to college and my time is on my own, my weekends are on my own, no one's watching what I do and what I don't do, well, what stays with me? What remains? And that's how we start to see, okay, these were the things that I did just because of where I was. But once we get out of that environment, it's actually really a beautiful journey if you get to actually see who you are from within and what the convictions are that you hold about your life. This is kind of a negative example, but one of my closest friends through all of seminary, at least for about 4 or 5 years, we encouraged each other very much to strive for holiness. And we'd wake up every morning during the week, at least at like 5:15. I'd go knock on his door. If he wasn't up, I'd always have water in my hand to throw on him and, just get him up and get him downstairs. We'd go have coffee together and we'd pray our liturgy at the hours. And then we'd do a holy hour together, go to Mass, and, the rest of the day from there. But we really encourage each other in so many ways of striving for holiness in this environment. 2 years after he was ordained a priest, he left the priesthood. And he said something to me that has always stuck. He said that I realized that what we were doing, and who I wanted to be couldn't exist outside of those seminary walls. Right? So it wasn't transferable to the rest of his life as a priest. That's an external locus of control. I can only be who I am in this place. And sometimes we don't realize that until the structure falls down. We think that we are who we are and we do what we do for good reason, but then we lose this structure and reality shows itself. Father Vogel, he gave a good talk to the students a couple weeks ago about dating. And one thing that he spoke about is the fact that right now, our system in America isn't protecting marriage. In the old days, it's like boxing. Couples could really go at it and fight and have their bouts, but they'd bounce off the ropes. There's ropes around the ring. So you can go through your struggles, but you'd bounce off those ropes, which were, someplace like illegal to get married, or the public shame, the discouragement of it, all of that helped keep families together. But now in our times, it's basically encouraged and incentivized for couples to get divorced. And so that means when they're wrestling, when they're boxing, if you get too close to the edge of the ring, you just fall out. Right? So there's no longer that external locus to protect even matrimony in our times. And the readings, that's what it's asking. Who do we become in times of distress, in times of destruction? The readings warn of times of calamity and upheaval. And at the same time, it says, some will become an everlasting horror and disgrace, meaning that they'll be swept away with the evils of those times. It says, but others will become like stars shining in the firmament in the midst of the darkness, which that's what many of us here are, hopefully, that our lives are proclaiming. We're not being swept away with the evil of our times. We're proclaiming the truth of the gospel and living it in our flesh. Because I want to talk about the last 70 years of what we've seen, because I think when we're talking about the destruction, the falling of so many externals that helped in the past, I think that's something that America went through. A lot in the West went through over the last 77 years with Vatican II on an ecclesial level, and then also with the sexual revolution and kind of the throwing off of traditions and customs in America. It was a time of somewhat distress and revolution. So, for example, 1950s, right? 1950s, young men, the average young man was either in seminary or starting a family by 18, 19 years old, right? So the structure of community in America was encouraging men that you have to become independent, you have to become a provider, so that you, by the time you get out of the house by 18, can already provide for a family on your own. But now we look at our times, it's like at that time it was a 75-25% split. 75% of men were in college and 25% of women were in college. Now it's completely switched. 60% of college students are women, only 40% men. Right? So men don't have this natural incentive, or they're no longer by external structures encouraged to grow up early and mature and be providers for their home. Young women used to be just by society standards, young women were encouraged to be married by 18 years old. Virginity was the norm, the expectation, and anything outside of that was shamed. But now it's the exact opposite. For any young woman to want to become a homemaker, to want to get married when she's young, to want to remain a virgin until she's married, all of that is shamed in our times. Or if not shamed, definitely not encouraged as a lifestyle. Women are told that unless they go to college, fulfill their potential, become strong, independent, then they're not really living up to what they could be. And then as far as dating goes, dating's on the decline because of these standards that have broken down all across the board. 2/3 of men between 18 and 35 are single. 2/3 of men. And as I told you before, over 50% of women, first time in history, over 50% of women over the age of 30 are single and not married. And the majority of women going after, now dating's become something of the majority of women going after the same top 15 to 20% of men. Right? So actually polygamy is returning to society little by little, because women don't need to depend on a man to provide. The government's doing that. This is where the destruction, the breakdown of the externals has happened in our society, and we're seeing the effects in the way men are raised, in the way women are raised, and especially in the dating field. The students have been begging me to give more homilies on gender roles. So this is my gift to all of them once again. But the same thing happened in the Catholic Church. When you look at what happened in the Catholic Church after Vatican II, the 60s, you had 9/10 of seminarians left. 90% left seminary. We had 100,000 priests, 150,000 across the entire West, not just America, leave the priesthood. 90,000 nuns left the convent. And now for a woman to even consider becoming a nun, it's completely foreign. And men no longer even ask the question, am I called to be a priest? It's assumed that that's for the very smallest few out there. With that, we had a kind of a general, what they call a clericalization of the laity and a laicization of the priests, where we saw a lot of priests failing to lead, to guide their flocks in the teachings of the faith. We had actually great rebellions of priests and bishops against the authority of the Pope, Humanae Vitae, on contraceptives, saying that we're no longer going to obey the ways of old, that it's a new time, and the church needs to get with the times. With that, we had the breakdown of liturgical forms. So the liturgy started to be expressed in many different ways that was foreign by the way that was done for 500 years before that. Again, it was a time of distress, confusion, and chaos. Both in America and in the church, as Daniel was prophesying, it was a time of breakdown. And many people were consumed by that darkness. They were swept away with that times. But others were shining like stars in the firmament. And you look about it on a worldwide perspective. Ireland, one of the most Catholic nations before, lost the faith. France, the first daughter of Rome, lost the faith. Germany lost the faith. America lost the faith. And even in Mexico now, becoming more and more secularized, losing the faith. And yet what we see also in the midst of that, Asia and Africa are exploding in vocations, multiplying in numbers, and the faith is just so strong there. And you think about your own families. Think about where you came from. How many of your siblings, your extended family who grew up Catholic, still practice the faith today? And a lot of people I talk to, they're the minority in their own family line, still practicing and living the truths of the Catholic faith. And here you are. You guys are shining. You guys are the stars that Daniel was talking about, the ones who are not swept away with the destruction of the times, but are holding on to the faith. And like that, shining in the midst of the darkness. Because the real question is, who do we become when the externals that used to protect the faith and protect who we were break down? And I believe only those with an internal locus of control will even survive these times. At some point, you have to say, I am living this faith. I am following Christ. I'm following the teachings of the faith because this is who I am. This is what I believe. Whether anybody else sees it or not, this is me, a Catholic, following Christ through and through. Because I don't buy the whole, the problems in the faith came from just feminism or Vatican II. We would never have had such a ecclesial breakdown when we took down the walls if there was not already a pre-existing problem in the church. It's like homeschool kids or kids who went to Catholic school all their life, and the second they get out of the home, they lose their faith, they lose their morality, and they get just swept away with everybody else. And you can say, well, you could blame it on the times, you can blame it on the culture, but there had to be something wrong within that person that made it so the second they got outside those externals, everything fell with it. It's like you can have a rock that's sitting in a pond for 1,000 years and take it out on a hot day and put it on the beach. And within 20 minutes, dry. You can break that thing in half. Inside, dry as if it has never seen water in its life. Why? Because it never penetrated. That's why I think destruction, the falling down of the walls, the losing the externals is actually a really good thing. I think that God allows it to happen and He wants it to happen. Not only on a worldwide level, not only in a fully ecclesial level, but every time in our lives. Every time you're going through a change of moving somewhere else, being with new people, new times, you get to see what remains in you. Who are you in all those different circumstances? Because that's really who you are. Who I am in the depths of my being is what remains through all the things that change and all the people that change and all the times that change. What remains in me is who I've always been. And God allows the externals to break down over and over again so that we can come face to face with the truth of what's really inside of me and what is not. That's why it's a blessing. I love the fact that we're living in the times that we're living in. And I tell you, every young man and every young woman who is thinking about going into the priesthood or the convent, they're doing it because it's coming from within. And every young man and every young woman who are striving to live the courtship process right, holding on to their virginity, striving to become the best they can be in the midst of a generation that no longer supports that, it's coming from within them. And I think that means so much more to God than if everyone was just doing the right thing because everyone else is watching. In the end, God is always looking at our hearts. Why do I do what I do? Not what I do, but why. There's this really beautiful book I read in seminary, and by read, I mean I read the first page of it, but it was a really good first page. And I never got any further than that, but it was called The God Who Comes. And it's defined so much about how I view the Eucharist. I've never been so happy with liturgy and like the church, everything than at St. Paul's. I mean, we kill it like every week, you know, I'm not bragging, but yes, you know, it's amazing. Like all the altar boys, the incense, candles, everything's so beautiful. But I know this isn't going to be forever. You know, things are going to change. Times are going to change. I'll get sent away into exile at some point, probably. And I think about this book all the time. This man who was ordained a priest before Vatican II. And he saw the whole breakdown of the church, breakdown of the liturgy, the rebellion that was taking place, the throwing away of our faith and our morals. And he also saw the breakdown of America, of all these values that we held for so long. And he felt called to become a hermit, to leave active priesthood and go into the desert. And he said what he learned going into the simplicity of the desert. He said, when everything has fallen down, when we see the destruction of our liturgical forms, our morality, our hierarchy, and everything that kept the structures of our faith in place, when it all falls down, will we still see, will we still perceive the God who comes? The God who is still giving himself right here to us in the Eucharist, still present? Or will our faith fall with those structures? Only those with an internal locus of control, of faith, will be able to perceive that mystery regardless of what is going on around them. And that was the vision of the psalmist that we heard today. It's one of the most beautiful psalms that we have in our church. O Lord, my allotted portion and my cup, it is you who hold my fast lot. I set the Lord ever before me. With him at my right hand, I shall never be disturbed. If we always keep our eyes on Christ in the Eucharist, the God who never stops coming to us, regardless of where we are as a world, as a society, as a church, even wherever we are in our own lives. He who comes to show us the path of life, the fullness of joy, the delights in his presence forever. If we perceive that truly, like the just, we will shine brightly in the midst of the firmament, regardless of the darkness And in spite, not in spite, but even in the midst, in the glory of that darkness, both now on earth and for all eternity. As long as the faith comes from me and is not a product of my environment, then my environment becomes a product of me.